Good evening. How's everybody doing? I'm Cindy Harris, the Volunteer Services Liaison for the City of Grapevine Parks and Recreation Department. And I'm help supervise volunteers and oversee programming for Keep Grapevine Beautiful. We're so glad that you could join us tonight for our August Eco Talk. Tonight we have with us the staff from the Army Corps of Engineers to speak about flood control and dam management. And we also have Pugh from the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality to discuss the quality of Grapevine Lake's water. Before we begin though, I want to do a bit of housekeeping. Just so you know, the chat will be completely disabled during the webinar. You'll be able to type questions into the Q&A, and feel free to do that at any time during the webinar, and our presenters will answer questions at the end of the webinar. I'd like to introduce to you Amy Watkins from the Army Corps of Engineers. She is a natural resource specialist at Grapevine Lake. She has 6 years in her current position. And while in college, she also worked 2 summers at the lake as a summer park ranger. She has a Bachelor of Science degree from the University of North Texas in Recreation, Event, and Sports Management with a biology major. During her time off work, she enjoys camping with her husband, kids, and family dog. And she grew up camping with her family as well as being involved in Girl Scouts for 14 years that inspired her to pursue her career. We have Austin Smith. He's also a natural resource specialist at Grapevine Lake, and this is his first year in the Grapevine Project office. Austin was born and raised in a small town in Minnesota. He grew up loving the outdoors, specifically hunting and fishing, which is what drove him to attend a small university in North Dakota, Valley City State University. At VSCU, he majored in fisheries and wildlife sciences, and in the summer months, he worked for the Corps of Engineers as a junior park ranger at Lake Ashtabula in North Dakota for 4 years. And our third speaker is Pugh. She has a bachelor's degree in wildlife and fisheries conservation with a minor in criminal justice from Southeastern Oklahoma State University. Robin has been the aquatic scientist in the DFW region of the TCEQ for the past 5.5 years, and she's been with the agency for 11 years, including environmental investigation work in the AIR program. Previous work experience includes being a biologist aide at a fish hatchery, a part-time manager at as a cockatiel breeder, and a veterinary assistant and a game warden. So I'd like to welcome all of our speakers, and again, we'll begin with our Army Corps of Engineers presentation.
Hey there, everybody. All right, again, like she said, I'm Amy Watkins, so I'll be starting out our presentation. Hold on, technical difficulties. Okay, so I work for the Army Corps of Engineers. We are in the Trinity Regional Project that we specifically work at Grapevine. The Trinity Regional Project has 7 lakes. So you have Lavon, Louisville, Ray Roberts, Grapevine, Benbrook, Joe Pool, and Bardwell. As you can see, there's a map of where all of them are located. And you know what Ray Roberts, what water we let out of there affects Louisville. What affects Louisville affects, let out affects Grapevine, and so on until you get to the coast. So there's Grapevine Lake. That's a map, and that shows exactly where our actual fee boundary is. We also have flow easement boundary around the lake, which means several of our adjacent landowners, you might have flow easement in your backyard, which means we have the right to flood your backyard, even though it's your property. And so that's just one of the ways that we, manage the lake. And at one point, they decided we're going to have, flowage easement, so we don't have to take as much property from everybody, because most of that is worst case scenario flooding. Okay, so the main missions at Grapevine Lake, we have flood risk management. That's our #1 mission. That's why the lake was built. Then we have water supply. And then, of course, everybody likes to recreate on Grapevine Lake. And then environmental stewardship. And we'll talk about all those today. So flood risk management, the Rivers and Arbors Act of 1945 allowed Benbrook Lake, Grapevine Lake, Levon Lake, and Ray Roberts Lake, as well as modifications to the existing Garza Dam for the construction of Louisville Lake. You can see in that picture there, that was May of 1949, flooding in Fort Worth, Texas, before the local dams were completely built. And there were previous flood events that occurred before this. But the 1949 flood killed 10 people and caused $11 million in damage. The lake was constructed in 1948 and completed and started impounding water in 1952. Watershed, we have 700 square miles. The top of the dam is 588. The top of the uncontrolled spillway is 560, and then our normal conservation pool is 535, which gives us about 7,000 surface acres of water. The total land area is 15,700 acres with an additional 2,200 acres of flow easement. So we have a earthen filled dam. And so that kind of shows what the different elevations. So you can see the bottom dark red line, that's the top of where the sediment would be. And then at the bottom of the big structure, you may see when you go across the dam, is where the conduit works is. So inside there you have some gates that we can, open a little bit or open a lot and let as much water as we need to downstream. Then you have conservation pool, that's 535. That's our normal conservation pool, though nothing's been normal since 2015. Which if anybody's around at 2015, we had a really almost record-breaking flood that year. I think 1981 was the closest we'd gotten to that before. And we flooded a little bit every year since. So the 535, that anything, we'll kind of cover this on the next slide, but anything below that 535, basically the people who have the water rights tell us how much water to send downstream. Anything above that, we can kind of, not us as our lake, someone higher up in the district makes that decision of saying, okay, we need you to let out this much. And they tell us exactly where to put the gates and everything. And that's just so that they can keep it balanced, who's letting out what, and so we don't flood anything too bad. So the top of the flood pool is 560. That's where the spillway crest is. And then the maximum that we could ever hold in there would be 582. So the likeliness of it's getting to that is very unlikely, but we have that potential volume. So we own the bowl, but not the soup. So you have your conservation pool, which I just realized that was not updated for our lake. That's a different lake's conservation pool. Ours is 535. So then we have our water supply partners and contracts. So the City of Grapevine Water Treatment Plant has a water intake downstream, and then the City of Dallas retains water rights below the conservation pool. On Grapevine Lake, we have 11 recreation areas. Most of them are leased out to cities. So like all the Grapevine Lake parks, those are on Corp of Engineer land, but the city manages them. The only park that the Corps of Engineers actually still manages ourselves is Merle Park and Flower Mound. We have over 50 miles of trails throughout the lake. So we have horse trails, you have hike and bike trails. Of course, you can also hike on the horse trails, we have 3 hike and bike trails that are very popular. We have 12 boat ramps and then 3 marinas. So one of the big things that the Army Corps of Engineers, our big missions outside of flood control, is water safety. It's very high importance to us. We had 3 drownings occur this summer that could have been prevented by the person wearing a life jacket.
All right, I'm Austin Smith, and I'm going to be talking a little bit about the environmental stewardship. Grapevine Lake is surrounded by large rural tracts, but it's also surrounded by urban sprawl as well, as you may know. The rural tracts are mostly made up of native prairie areas as well as bottomland hardwoods. Some threats to the environmental equality are invasive species, pollution, encroachments, and excessive recreation. One of the biggest invasive species that is in our area is zebra mussels. It's currently in most of the lakes in this area. Grapevine Lake is considered fully infested. Zebra mussels filter the nutrients in the water and outcompete overwhelmed native species. It can also increase the water cost, and that's because they can clog up the pipes, as you can see in the picture there. You can also see a picture where they have attached to a native mussel. Effectively, it would be killed. Another important part to us is the water quality. The USACE is involved with water quality monitoring and protection. We do this through Section 404 of the Clean Water Act, which is the primary federal law in the United States that governs water pollution. Its objective is to restore and maintain the chemical, physical, and biological integrity of the nation's waters, recognizing the responsibilities of the states in addressing pollution and providing assistance to the states to do so, including funding for publicly owned treatment works for the improvement of wastewater treatment and maintaining the integrity of wetlands. Narrowing that down a little more, Section 404 of the Clean Water Act establishes a program to regulate the discharge of dredged or fill material into the waters of the United States, including our wetlands. Activities in the waters of the United States regulated under this program include fill for development, water resource projects such as dams, infrastructure development such as highways and airports, and mining projects. Section 404 requires a permit before it's dredged or fill material may be let into the waters of the United States unless the activity is exempt from Section 404. Some exemptions include certain farming and forestry activities. And then Title 36 is the principal set of rules and regulations that's issued by the federal agencies of the United States regarding forest parks and the public lands. So this is the main set of rules and regs that we follow. So this is what we're going to be enforcing. We also try to implement industry best management practices. And this is to help maintain as well as restore some of the native habitat that's out there. We do this through various burns that can take place. Wetland protection is also very important because this can help filter the water to just give us better water quality overall. Encroachments and trespasses are another important part that can hinder the practices that we try to do out here on the lake. And this is usually comprised of unauthorized use or development of government property. And it can limit the green space and wildlife corridors. It can also increase sedimentation and erosion. And it can jeopardize designed operation of the lake. If too much fill or if something's built within our flowage easement, what that essentially does is it takes up space that we have previously calculated in where we want to flood up to. And so if something's built, it'll take up space that now that water that we want to flood up to, we don't have enough room for that water, so we'd end up having to go past the 572 line. And overall, it can be very costly to the government and taxpayers overall. Usually a trespass is not very permanent, and it can be something that can be fixed usually pretty easily. An encroachment, on the other hand, is usually applies to a structure. It's more permanent, and it's usually not as easy to fix. Here you will see an example of a trespass. This landowner had mowed the grass on our land, so the landowner behind us mowed our land, and so that gets rid of native habitat. And it would be considered a trespass because that grass is most likely going to grow back fairly quick. This next slide is a picture of a tree that was cut down, and this would be considered an encroachment because that tree, it can't just grow back overnight. It's going to take many years for that to grow back. So that's why that would be considered an encroachment. Some of the challenges we see that we're going to face going forward include some of the extensive development that continues in our area, whether it be housing communities or various businesses. And this is going to create increased demand on resources and infrastructure, such as more water being needed, more roads, and just overall space. On top of this, our budgets usually are not going up. Sadly to say, they're either staying the same or they're going down. So it's really hard for us to continue to maintain to the point we need to. So some of the solutions we have are some partnerships, and the partnerships can provide various things such as funding or just plans or help work man hours. They can provide many things that overall help us. Strategic planning is big, and the North Central Texas Council of Governments, they usually have some watershed-based solutions that help us. And also continuing some education and outreach to reach out to the public and just educate them overall, help them understand what we do, because at times I know it can not seem very reasonable or can seem senseless at times, but if we're able to reach out and educate the public on the reasoning behind the stuff we do, it can help them better understand. So in turn, we don't receive as much pushback, and just so we all understand and are on the same page. Strict enforcement of laws and regs is also big. If we let one thing slide, it could snowball, and it ends up being a much larger issue than it would be if we would have stopped it and strictly enforced it right at the base of all things. So our main goal is to strictly enforce all of our laws and regs out there so we can, in turn, keep it how it's supposed to be.
Yeah, that's the end of our presentation. We're doing questions at the very end.
We'll do
Okay.
questions at the
So
end.
we'll do questions at the end.
Robin, we're going to move to your presentation now. So you can unmute and share your screen when you're ready.
Okay, I'm unmuted now.
No, I don't see your screen yet. We can see you, but I can't see your presentation.
But you can hear me then.
Yeah. Perfect. There you are.
Okay, so I'm Robin Pugh. I am a surface water quality monitoring aquatic scientist based in the DFW Region Office of the TCEQ. It's the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality. And so I'm going to be talking about the surface water quality in Lake Grapevine and who is monitoring it and how we are monitoring. So the first question I was asked was, who monitors Lake Grapevine? So Lake Grapevine is monitored by the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality Surface Water Quality Monitoring Program, which would be me, and the Clean Rivers Program, which is like the TCEQ is kind of like an umbrella over the Clean Rivers Program, where we work with what we call river partners. And they work under the same, it's called a QAPP, a Quality Assurance Plan, and the same policies and procedures for our sampling so that we are all collecting similar, representative, and repeatable data. Monitoring in Lake Grapevine itself is conducted both by myself personally, I was actually out there yesterday, and our Clean Rivers Program sister agencies of the City of Dallas and the Trinity River Authority. So what is monitored? Typical routine monitoring for any surface water quality monitoring typically covers a bacteria, which in fresh water is going to be E. coli. We do total suspended solids, volatile suspended solids, sulfate, chloride, fluoride, and alkalinity. And then we'll do a nutrient panel, nitrate, nitrite, ammonia, phosphorus, and total organic carbon. And then we measure chlorophyll A as an indicator of algal activity. Chlorophyll A is actually easier and cheaper to measure than to directly measure algal biomass. I'll also measure in site, what's called in situ, in the lake, temperature, pH, conductivity, which is basically a measurement of the dissolved solids in the water, because pure water does not actually conduct electricity. It is the minerals and salts and such that is within the water that actually makes water very conductive of electricity. We also measure dissolved oxygen. I'll measure clarity with what's called a Secchi disc. If you can you see my pointer here, this little round thing here? That's actually just a thing to look and see how deep into the water you can see it, to measure how clarity. And then in the tributaries that lead into the lake, in rivers and streams, we will measure flow, so how much water is actually moving through that river or stream. Why do we do it? We're required by the Clean Water Act to maintain a statewide database, and we have to submit to the EPA a integrated report every 2 years for is the water meeting its designated uses. That integrated report is publicly available on our agency website. We can use this data to see trends and impacts in a body of water, see if there's any changes. We can also use it to evaluate for sources of pollution. If we have a body of water, we're seeing impacts in one area, but we're not seeing those upstream, we can start to see where those impacts could possibly be coming from. And that's where best management practices or permit actions can be taken. Why do we do that? The data that we collect both through the TCEQ and through our sister agencies, is all compiled into one large database. It is then used by permitting. They can use it to determine water body specific discharge limits, best management practices, things that need to go on in that water body. Within our agency, our investigators and ER can query that information to see historical water quality, if there are trends or if they've had a pollution event and they want to see what that water body needs to be corrected to. Also, our water quality section within the agency will use that data for the development of what's called TMDLs, which is total maximum daily loads, which is basically an enforceable limit on the impacts to that water quality. So that's really where your permit limits and permit required best management practices are going to come from, the TMDL plan. And then they also use that to develop watershed protection plans, which are not enforceable, but they are more a stakeholder cooperation to improve the body of water. And with watershed protection plans, they will do public meetings and even events kind of similar to this, where we're reaching out and talking to the stakeholders in the watershed. So those people who have land up against the body of water, those people who recreate there, anyone who truly cares about that body of water, and discuss what you can do to minimize the impacts or affect the water quality within that body. We also have a water quality standards group that kind of compiles this and works on which direction we need to be going with it. And the public, you can actually view all of the data that we collect both on Grapevine Lake and throughout the state online. Our agency, I don't know if these presentations are going to be available afterwards. If you don't have time to write down any of these email addresses, any of these web addresses that I put here, you can always go to our agency website, tcq.texas.gov, and just search for surface water quality. And we have a page there that has links to all of the pertinent data for surface water quality within the state. When do we do this monitoring? We'll do it roughly the similar time of the day and season, event to event and year to year. And the reason that we want to do that is so that we have comparable data. If I'm going out there at 8 o'clock in the morning one day, and then I'm going out there at 5:30 in the evening another day, it's not going to really tell me what's going on from day to day on a consistent basis. And the reason for that is that you can have what's called deal fluctuations. There can be changes in that body of water throughout the day. So I want to get a snapshot in time. And if I'm taking readings at 8 o'clock in the morning, I'm probably going to get a lower pH, lower dissolved oxygen than if I'm taking those readings late in the day when the sunlight's been hitting it and there's been photosynthesis occurring. If I don't typically want to be doing these when the body of water is experiencing change. So not generally immediately after a rain or when the lake or a river is on the rise or the fall. And that's because what's going on when you're experiencing a rainfall event is not necessarily representative of your day-to-day condition of that body of water. When I do streams, those must be above what's called the 7Q2, which is a 7-year, 2-day low flow. In other words, the worst possible condition, lowest flow that stream could be in, we're not necessarily going to consider representative. And yes, we do sample year round. In this picture here, I believe the high that day was reached pretty close to the time that picture was taken. It was 36 degrees. So we do sample year round, and in 100 degrees, like say, we're out there the last 2 days, 3 days. So it's not always just sunshine and roses. Where do we monitor? So here I have a map of Lake Grapevine. This is taken directly off of our surface water quality viewer, which I'll give you a link to later, and a link to it can be found on our agency webpage under the surface water quality. All of these dots that you see on this picture are actually either current or previously monitored sites. The red ones typically should represent currently monitored, and the gray ones previous or historical sites, although I have seen on occasion where one may not show up red if it's active. The two that I monitor are actually 16,112 and 11,035 right here. Trinity River Authority does this one, and then City of Dallas does several up on the arms where they're sampling for metals and stuff. I believe Trinity River Authority monitors in Denton Creek here. And then this other map here just happens to be the map I have on my wall, and it's actually an older map. I have a few more sites now, but all those little pins you see there are actually where I personally monitor within the DFW region. Where is Lake Grapevine monitored? So this is a current map off of our coordinated monitoring page. And so all those little red droplets are actually where we are currently monitoring. And the chart down at the bottom shows what we're monitoring for. So you can see that myself and Trinity River Authority is doing the conventional bacteria and field, which is basically the parameters that I went over earlier. And then the City of Dallas up in the arms is monitoring for metals in water twice a year. And then they are monitoring field, which is basically your temperature, dissolved oxygen, pH, and conductivity and clarity every month. And where do we monitor? We monitor in both lakes and streams. This is actually a picture of a training event where we are practicing our monitoring. How does Lake Grapevine compare? So Lake Grapevine is what we categorize as fully supporting or no concern for most of the parameters across the lake. So overall, pretty good water quality. Where we do have an issue, it is classified as not supporting for pH in the upper portion near Marshall Creek Park. And that's because there's been some high readings for pH above 9 is where a pH of 9 or below 5 is where we consider to become hazardous for aquatic life. That is near the Denton Creek Inlet area. Something to point out that has an impact on water quality is Denton Creek also has a concern for nitrate in water, nitrate being a nutrient commonly coming from manure or fertilizer or any of our other wonderful things we want to put on to make our plants on the land grow. It's currently classified to have ongoing monitoring in order to determine the severity and validity. So just because we got like one reading or one bad reading, that doesn't necessarily mean that the water quality is bad. We could have had a single event because something happened in the body of water, or that could have been taken during a drought condition when maybe it wasn't representative of the overall water quality. So there's currently ongoing monitoring to determine if that's a consistent situation or if it was a one-time event and not something to be concerned with. Things to point out about pH is that it can be heavily affected by runoff. And one of the reasons for this is if you have a pollutant or a contaminant that has a pH, that can affect it. Now, dilution in a lake is a big factor, so it would have to be a pretty large contaminant base to cause a pH effect in the lake. However, runoff in the way of nutrient, especially when we look at Denton Creek and see that nitrate is a concern in Denton Creek on that end of the lake, any nutrient can feed algae. So we have large algae blooms. If you've spent much time on Grapevine Lake, you know that it is pretty green most of the time. So there's a pretty healthy algal population on Grapevine Lake. And of course, that's going to tend to be heavier in the areas that have more nutrient input, like the upstream ends near Denton Creek. So what happens with algae is that you will have deal or daily fluctuations. So pH is actually a measurement of your oxygen and hydroxide ions in the water, which is somewhat influenced by your dissolved oxygen within the water. So if you think about it, when you have an algae bloom and you have photosynthesis, then you have a lot of oxygen going into the water during the day when the sun is shining and you're getting photosynthesis, which can tend to increase your pH. You have a very high pH. And then overnight, that algae tends to experience respiration, and it will decay, and you'll actually have lower DO. You will have the lowest DO in any body of water immediately before the sun comes up during the day, before photosynthesis can begin again. And you will also tend to have a lower pH at that point in time. So how can residents in the area help to improve or to maintain the water quality in Grapevine Lake? So if one of our biggest concerns is pH and nutrients in the area, obviously the quickest and most intuitive solution would be just in your yard, don't over apply fertilizers or pesticides. Even if you don't live up against the lake, anywhere within the watershed, when it rains, if you think more is better when you apply fertilizers and pesticides, it's actually not. Most of those application rates that you will find on the label for your fertilizers and pesticides are based on what the soil or the vegetation is expected to actually be able to uptake. What it cannot uptake is going to flow off. It's going to flow into storm drains and in turn end up in the lake. The other thing is to know that over application of fertilizers can actually hinder your yard, because it'll actually lead your grass to have more shallow root systems, because it's not digging those roots down deep to try to reach nutrient. And so it'll therefore also become more dependent on shallow water. It needs watered more often to look green. It won't keep itself as green. It won't be as healthy of a lawn. So actually you're doing your lawn and the lake a disservice by over applying. Another thing is to clean up after pets, because obviously any manure has a nutrient issue. And the other thing is bacteria. When we measure the E. coli, we are measuring a level of bacteria to see what could possibly harm, a human or some of the most sensitive members of our population if they were to get their head underwater, skiing, swimming, such like that, doing contact recreation. And an important thing to think about, everybody's like, well, but the deer poop in the woods. Different animals actually have various levels of bacteria in their gut. And actually dogs have a very, very high level. So dogs are actually one of the highest contributors to E. coli in a lot of watersheds. So just by cleaning up after your pets, even in your own yard or even walking down the street or in the park, has a very large impact on the water body. Also maintaining septic systems and sewer lines. A lot of the area around Grapevine Lake and upstream is still fairly rural or has historical septic systems. Many of these, if they're very old, people think they leave them out there and, oh, it's doing fine. But when they're not well maintained and they're not properly functioning, they tend to release more both nutrient and bacteria to the surface of the soil, which then flows into the lake. You can also help by installing and maintaining rain gardens and riparian zones. So like when the Corps was talking about having the grass mowed down on the place, that's where having that taller grass gives a better riparian zone. It helps control runoff. It lets the water absorb more before it goes into the lake, and also it will helps to reduce erosion. Rain gardens, the same thing. You can just have a little rain garden in your front yard, backyard, along the side of the ditch. And these are just areas that are kind of like depression area in the ground where the water is allowed to accumulate and pool for a bit, and where it could sink into the ground a little slower rather than just quickly running off as soon as the rain falls. And these are typically populated with native plants that are hardy enough to deal with our drought periods, but also can suck up plenty of water and deal with, slightly moist soil conditions during those times of heavier rain. So those help both the lake and your yard be beautiful, and any wildlife or hummingbirds and butterflies you might like. How do you learn more? Again, these are the websites that I said that I would provide, and I don't know if this will be available afterwards. You can always, like I say, on our agency website, search for surface water quality, and links to all of these are available on that webpage. Or you could email me or contact me in our DFW region office, and I would be glad to provide that information. So the first one's actually our SWCM data viewer, and that is basically a map viewer of the state of Texas, and it shows all of the sites across the lake, like that picture I showed you with the gray and red dots. So it will show you all those sites all the way across the state of Texas. You can zoom into any area. You can look at a site. You can actually click on a site and pull it up, and you can actually download the historical water quality data for that site. I will warn you that for some of those areas, that can be a large amount of data, and it can slow down or crash a computer at times. It's some of these sites have been monitored for up to 40 or 50 years. Some have only been monitored for 20 or 30. And then I have experience too that I typically will pull data from a different site where an internal, I actually pull it directly from the database where I can get more pointed data, but I have pulled it from this agency viewer before, and it sometimes won't pull just from that site, but all data within that what we call a segment, which is typically going to be a large portion of the lake or the entire lake, or a stream segment that may be 20 miles long. It may have several monitoring sites in it. Our SWCM webpage, again, you can just search for surface water quality monitoring on our agency webpage, and that will come up. The Texas Water Quality Standards has a link on there also, and that is what standards we are trying to attain. We have statewide standards, and then we have some particular water body standards, water body specific standards. And then the integrated report is actually the report, which it's not a report that you would sit down and read. It's a little bit more of a reference material, like an encyclopedia where you can look things up. And that's what I mentioned that we would provide to the EPA every 2 years, and is available on the public website. So that is the end, and I'm ready for questions.
Thank you, Robin.
I actually need to step away for 1 second, and I will be right back.
So I'm going to have to get closer to the screen to read the questions, friends. Okay, so Cor, I think this first question is for you. Since the lake has opened, has there been a significant amount of silt accumulated? And if so, has it reduced the capacity of the lake by what percent? Amy, do you know the answer to this one?
As far as I know, we haven't had a significant amount of silt accumulation. Nothing that's impacted our day-to-day operations at this point.
With population growth and pending water shortages, is the Corps considering increasing the conservation level of the lake, allowing increased storage capacity?
We are not. I believe that was designated by possibly even Congress on water conservation level. Don't quote me on that one though. Okay. But no, we haven't had any conversations about increasing that.
And how often is the dam inspected for integrity of construction?
So we usually, we have someone from the district that comes out and inspects it monthly. And then whenever we are in flood stages, depending on which, how high up the water is, we have different levels. So we'll go into like weekly inspections, and then as the lake level goes up more, we'll go into daily inspections. And then when we get into a critical level close to it going over the uncontrolled spillway, we'll go into 24-hour surveillance. And then every 5 years, they do a full-on inspection. They go into the conduits and inspect all of that. And we completely, like, they call it a dewatering. So we'll take all the water that's right below the controlled spillway And we'll just inspect all that to make sure everything looks good there as well.
And what are you inspecting, Amy? Are you inspecting what the dam is made out of? Are you inspecting the spillway itself, or what are you looking at?
So like in our like flood, our monthly, and then like our flood time inspections, will be going up and down both sides of the dam, just checking to make sure we don't have any slides or random pooling, anything that would indicate that there could be a leak in the dam. We do have these things called Pugh tubes, which are essentially like a well drilled down. And so we go through, there's, I think 16 of them now. So we just stick a little tape measure thing down there, and it, as soon as it hits water, it tells us, oh, I've hit water, and then we measure just to see if that's fluctuated or not. And then we also have, all dams leak a little bit. So we also have these things called weirs, which just kind of say that it's right next to the uncontrolled spillway, that just kind of say, okay, this is the flow that's coming out from there. And we check for that, and we also check to see if there's any sedimentation coming out of it.
Okay, that makes sense. Good. Robin, I don't know if this is for you or for Amy. Is there a resolution to the zebra mussel infestation?
No, there's not. There's no really good way to get rid of them without affecting the native species that are in the lake. They're just kind of there. It's almost to a point where we just have to live with it. Prevention to prevent it spreading to other lakes is a big thing. Clean, drain, dry your boat. Make sure it's clean before you enter the lake. When you get done off the lake, pull the plug, make sure it's dry. Make sure you're not transporting any invasive species, because they're not the only invasive species out there.
But are zebra mussels primarily introduced to water through boating, or how do they get there in the first place?
Primarily through boats, yeah. Yeah, so they first came in through the Great Lakes, and then they've kind of spread from there. I believe it's the Great Lakes anyways. And yeah, so they just spread, and I'm sure they can transport via birds too, but primarily it's from guys who go and fish one lake one day, and they go and fish another lake that same day, and they don't clean, drain, or dry their boats. They're just transporting the villagers is what they're called.
Okay. Robin, can you hear us?
You have to ask to unmute her.
Austin, do you know if the zebra mussel infestation impacts our water quality?
So I know it does. I don't know how. I know they do tend to, because of how they filter the water. I know they have effects on the algae, and I've seen it up north where I've come from. They'll turn a water that's not really the clearest, and they'll turn it crystal clear. I don't really see, I could be wrong, but I don't really see that happening here because of the creek. There's a constant flow of water. There's new water that's.
Robin, do you
Robin might have a better
you want to
answer.
weigh in on that? Do you see that the zebra mussels are affecting the water quality?
Hang on. I'm sorry, I had to step away. I'm a single parent and I had a massive meltdown over here. So I very much apologize.
Okay.
So the zebra mussels do tend to affect the water quality. They did do some research on Ray Roberts Lake to where there were some big impacts when it came to like pH and such. And then those there were impacts, and then they kind of leveled off with time. Also, some of the research they've been doing on zebra mussels has indicated that like when they hit a body of water, they kind of boom and then bust and then level out and reach a level of static. Like they come in and they hit really hard, and they tend to just become a just massive issue, and then they kind of fall back down and level off. They have actually, they did catch them in Lake Waco, and they caught them early enough on that they were actually, they believe, able to eradicate them from Lake Waco. And they basically did that by locating an individual location, an individual bed, and then basically smothering them out.
Oh, interesting. Okay, well, that's good to know. So, Robin, does having a high algae, presence of algae in a lake, is that a bad thing? I mean, the more algae present, the worse the quality of the water is. Is that true, or?
So a lot of algae is an indicator of a high nutrient content, which is definitely a bad. It puts it, it's in a high trophic state. It's a very productive lake, which can be good in the way of you have a lot of algae, then you have a lot of zooplankton, you have a lot of fish to eat them, you have a lot of productivity in the lake, period, which can help with the fishery. However, there is a point at which it is too much. So too much algae can cause fish kills because, like I discussed earlier, algae will bloom during the day, it'll photosynthesize, and then in the evening when it's not photosynthesizing, or on a cloudy day when it's not getting enough sunlight to photosynthesize adequately, then it will respire and consume oxygen. And then when that happens, you'll have fish kills. So you might have an early morning. If you had a lake that was very, very nutrient rich and it had a very high algae population, you could have say early morning fish kills up in coves or things like that.
Okay.
Yeah, where you would have a low dissolved oxygen event.
Okay. And so, Robin, you referred to rain gardens. So something like that, are you talking about more just of planting more native plants in yards or beds, or is there something that is specifically called a rain garden?
Yeah, anytime you're planting more native plants, that's always going to be beneficial. But rain gardens themselves are actually, they're going to be like a depression in the ground, like a bioswale, or an area that's designed to catch the water and let it filter down slowly rather than running off quickly. So like a raised flower bed would not qualify as a rain garden. Somewhere that's more of a depression, maybe a low spot along the sidewalk, or a lot of times where these will be installed like commercially, will be like, say, in a parking lot, instead of having a raised median with curves around it, they just use the little concrete bumpers to keep the cars out, and then there will be a low spot rather than that raised median, and that low spot will have the garden in it for a rain garden. But you can do that in your yard as well, along a ditch, an area that may hold water already, that may be a problem with a drainage area problem, could easily be turned into a rain garden. Okay,
that makes sense. That makes sense. So an expert, somebody that would know more about rain gardens, is going to be somebody like a landscape architect, someone like that that's experienced in how where plants can be planted and grading and that kind of thing, correct?
Yes, and the Extension Service has information on that. Okay.
County Extension Service, got it. Okay, one of our attendees said, I'd like to have a discussion about enforcement, especially homeowners that may be cutting trees down on Corp property. So if we, Amy, see or know of residents that might be doing that, do we report it to you?
Yes,
to the
call our office. He was asking for an email as well. You can go to our website. It's kind of long, so I just tell everybody to search for USACE Grapevine, or U.S. Army Corps of Engineers Grapevine. And there is an email me button that I think goes straight to our lake manager.
Yeah. Okay. And also just, we have one more question, but just before I forget, the video will be posted on the Keep Grapevine Beautiful website. It will also be posted on our YouTube channel. So also attendees will receive the link to the video. We'll have that, but we'll also be posting any links that Robin provided, and then the link to the Corps office on Keep Grapevine Beautiful's new website. So keepgrapevinebeautiful.org will have all of these links on our site. And then the last question, Kelly Armstrong says, Robin, she says, I have a boat that goes from lake to lake in one day. the cleaning solution for zebra mussels should be what? And if I don't go from the lake to a different lake in the same day, will the zebra mussels die? So what's the time span there for, do they just die or do you need to clean your boat off every time?
They can die off with extended periods in dry weather. There's actually, I believe it's the 100th Meridian Initiative online, has information on appropriately treating your boats and any gear. Are we having a problem?
No, I'm trying to, somebody has their hand raised. I'm just figuring that
out. Okay, so
yeah,
so the 100th Meridian Initiative has a lot of information on that, including drying times for different longitude and latitudes. The treatment to go from one lake to another is, I believe, like a 10% bleach solution or hot water. And there is one car wash on Dove Lane, anyway, near Lake Grapevine, that is advertised as hot water wash. But I can tell you from experience that hot water does not last long enough to actually wash an entire boat and rid it of zebra mussels.
Okay.
Additionally, the Texas Parks and Wildlife webpage has a list of all of the known zebra mussel lakes within the state. And you'll see that they're pretty much clustered around the DFW area and down the I-35 corridor. We just recently got some heading over towards the Houston area. So it's basically along your lanes of travel where your boaters are going from lake to lake.
Okay.
I would not ever recommend going from one lake to another in the same day. I myself do not ever go from one lake to another in the same day. If I'm sampling multiple lakes in a day, then I switch boats. I would recommend to anyone that they would plan their trips accordingly so that you're not going from one lake to another. Additionally, in the summertime, if you wash your boat off after any lake, and if you are going from a lake that is a known zebra mussel lake, like Grapevine, Ray Roberts, Louisville, all those lakes, don't go to a lake that is not known to have them, like PK or something. One moment. I'm sorry. So do not go from a infested lake to a clean lake. Certainly, I would never do that in the same day. And then typically wash your boat after going to a lake and then let it dry. And again, the information for the timelines on how long to let them dry can be found on the 100th Meridian Initiative. And in the wintertime or humid weather, you're going to want to let it dry much longer than during in the summertime. In the summertime with hot, dry weather, you may be able to get away with a week.
Okay. All right. Good. Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Let's see. Amy, what are the penalties for cutting the tree down on Corp property?
Yeah. It can vary, if it's insufficient, like a very small tree, or if there's obvious, we've caught someone cutting it down and it looks like, there was something wrong with the tree that's obvious, then we could possibly just write a normal citation. But there are some that we have gone to, usually don't go to court, but we've basically come up with, filed an encroachment on them and basically came up with the amount of what it would cost to replace that tree based on the diameter and stuff.
That makes sense. Okay. Robin, one last question for you. Do you feel like that the zebra mussels transfer in flooding and discharge from the dam? So if the lake floods, do they float away? They affect the stream. You're muted.
Yeah, you'll have to ask her at the top.
Oh.
Right there. Ask her.
I'm sorry.
Unmute.
There you go.
So yes, they can travel downstream. So yes, they can travel downstream, and you will notice them once they're in a body of water. We'll start seeing them in the lakes that are further downstream. They've recently been noticed in one of the Highland lakes in the Colorado River system. So of course, we're immediately expecting them to spread to the other further downstream lakes.
Okay. Robin, I know this is your family time. Thank you so much.
No, I'm so sorry that
No, it's part of
don't
having a family and kids.
this time of night.
We
I very much
appreciate your
apologize.
time so very much. So we appreciate it. And I'm going to wrap up here. I want to thank Amy and Austin and Robin. We appreciate everybody's time and for sharing your expertise with us. Again, the video will be on our website and our YouTube channel. We hope that everybody will be able to join us for next month's Eco Talk on September the 22nd. The DFW Airport Environmental Affairs Department will be presenting virtually about their sustainability and food waste program. So again, thank you for everybody joining us. Amy, Austin, and Robin, y'all have a good evening. Thank you.
Thank you.